Welcome. It's the Matt Sager Podcast, Friday, February 15th of 2019. Hope you had a wonderful Valentine's Day with your sweetheart. Or if you're single, I hope you treated yourself nicely. Got yourself some chocolates, flowers, did some kind of hashtag self-care kind of thing. Everyone deserves love, and whether it be from inside or out or some weird twisted combination of the two, I hope you've got it. Speaking of weird, twisted things, today is a triumph for the weird and freaky among us, present company very much included. It's a double dose today from the world of streaming of adaptations of comics, which sort of their main premise is that they're freaks, which of course is a tradition dating back to at the very least the X-Men, if not the EC comics and the Red Scare comics about what would happen after a nuclear disaster. But the X-Men comics were the first books that truly embraced the weird, celebrated the weird, called out the fact that society treats different people often cruelly and unfairly, when in fact us weirdos have a lot to offer, often stuff that no one else can. In my case, I've got a terrible sense of geography. Lived in Greenwich Village my whole life, and I'd have trouble guiding you around. But for instance, I could tell you who created the Umbrella Academy. It was Gerard Way, who you may know either as a musician with My Chemical Romance and his solo projects, or you maybe know him primarily as the writer of the Umbrella Academy. That is certainly an accomplishment, one that really is now on par, I believe, with his music. I frankly am not a huge fan of his music, and I do like the Umbrella Academy very much. I think he's a great writer. And today, Netflix premiered their adaptation, a whole series of Umbrella Academy, and it is awesome. But that's only half of the story about today and why it's so very special for people who like the weird, who like comics, and who likes adaptations of the same on their streaming services. Because on Netflix, we do have the Umbrella Academy, and I can honestly say, even more than the comic, it stands out as being really unique. I don't think there's anything like this on TV, on any streaming services, but there is something that was released today that does fit a similar mold. It, too, it actually premiered a bit before the X-Men. There's a lot of controversy as to whether or not the X-Men was actually a derivative, ripoff of this comic, the Doom Patrol, the original Freaks. I suspected that the adaptation of the Doom Patrol would be really good because, as I've mentioned in the past on this podcast, it took some doing. I think it was ultimately because there was this massive Christmas sale where it was discounted, like your first year was like half off. I caved and subscribed to DC Universe. And I did this in spite of not enjoying what I'd seen of the Titans, which was really their only marquee new show that they debuted with. At the same time as this sale, the Titans was getting ready to air its season finale that looked amazing and honestly, without giving anything away, was actually a bit of a cheat. It's kind of a downer. But I did watch the entire series from beginning to end, and the one episode that I really enjoyed barely had the Titans appearing in it at all. But it was the episode, I believe it was episode 4, titled Doom Patrol, where Garfield, Beast Boy, brings Raven in to meet his crazy, weird family that he lives with Brendan Fraser as Robot Man, Timothy Dalton as the Chief, Niles Calder, and just the most awesome interpretations I could have ever hoped to see of Elasti-Woman with all this new, upsetting, dark pathos added to her. The kind of stuff that if Grant Morrison had been writing Rita Farr instead of focusing largely on his new characters, this is, I believe, how Grant Morrison would have handled that character. Just really awesome, really dark, really trippy and multi-layered and just really interesting. Everything that the rest of the Titans was not. Deeply developed, characters with purpose, a family vibe, a reason for them to be a team, a common cause, and a fight of their own. That even when they're not up against the Brain and Monsieur Mala or any of their, the Animal, Vegetable, Mineral Man, I think, was a late-stage enemy of the Doom Patrol from the Grant Morrison years, that aside from all those fights, when they come home and they just have to co-inhabit the same home, they fight amongst each other, and then when the lights go out and they're all alone, it's just them and the mirror, there's still a fight going on. Whether it's Larry, Negative Man, dealing with being a kind of monster, Cliff, Robot Man, dealing with the fact that he's a robot man. Elasti-Woman is just, I'm going to leave that for you to examine for yourself, but she's got issues. And seemingly, so does Chief. And it is true that in many of his incarnations, he's always had a little bit of an opportunistic streak, a little bit nasty, a little bit cold and calculating. And Timothy Dalton has clearly analyzed the character, done a lot of reading up on him, because he infuses every element of his performance, even when it's not like, here's a scene where the Chief's being a dick. If it's just the Chief bringing everybody together over the dinner table or strategizing stuff, he still shows all this mystery, all these hidden dark intentions, and the sense that while he does truly love and care about not only people, but especially the Doom Patrol, he also sees them as a commodity to be used for his science experiments or or anything else. And I've got to say, the trailers are up. You can check them out on YouTube. They are in no way, like for instance, the way I complained about the Titans finale. I saw the teasers for that on YouTube and thought, oh my God, it's going to be this crazy thing where Batman does this, and that. And it was kind of a cheat, a little bit of a misdirect. I can honestly say that the trailers for Doom Patrol, the best ones, are completely accurate. Without giving any kind of plot points away, they show you an idea of what to expect. But I'm telling you, if you're a fan of the Doom Patrol, it's time. It is now time to join DC Universe. This show works on every level, and I can't wait to watch the rest of the season, and many seasons more besides, I hope. And the Umbrella Academy, I haven't yet finished binging this first season, but I'm about at the 3/4 mark. And it's really, really good. That, again, well, first off, the comics, if you're interested in a primer on the group, or just reading the comics because they're great. They're published by Dark Horse, and I believe Comixology.com has a sale on right now on the Umbrella Academy books, specifically because of the interest generated by the Netflix series. So I would hop on over there, pick something up, but certainly, regardless of whether you do that, if you're a fan of superhero entertainment, and if you're at all a fan of the unexpected, weird, strange, this show is great. Netflix invested a lot in terms of both a willingness to go to strange new places. They clearly didn't skimp on the casting. The cast is spectacular. Ditto the visuals, camera work, all of it. It's just really great. It is a good day to be a freak. So it's a good day for me, and hopefully one for you as well. Speaking of me being a freak, by the way, I mentioned earlier this week on an episode of this podcast that I was sort of putting out feelers, asking for recommendations for a doctor, a primary care provider. You know, the person you see once a year to get your physical, and the person who communicates with your various specialists and keeps your record sort of centrally focused. So, like, they don't treat you for, like, a broken foot, but they'll either send you to someone, or if you find somebody on your own, they'll collate and collect these records so that 5 years from now, if I say, hey, what was wrong with me in 2018? They can say, oh, you broke your foot. We've got it right here in your chart. I haven't broken my foot, by the way. That's just an easy example I'm coming up with. One that does not describe what I dealt with earlier this week, which the bottom line is this. The headline is, I found a new PCP the very next day after that podcast aired. She's wonderful. I'm really lucky. Again, they're not the ones you go to 9 times out of 10 when you need help, other than to say, hey, can you send me somewhere? I've got a problem. But this doctor not only did so, but the thing I was dealing with, she took care of it for me. And so I couldn't be happier. If you want to send me names, by all means, keep going. But I have a PCP, and she's great. So it's great when within the space of just a couple of days, I can start an episode of this show with a real problem. And then like a couple days later, it's completely solved. I almost forgot to bring it up. I didn't want to go into the weekend without saying thank you, but no thank you. I no longer am soliciting names or contact information for PCPs, but thank you very, very much to everyone who sent me those. It's much appreciated. Lastly, I think we need to talk a little bit about what's going on at DC. DC Comics, I mean. Media companies all over the place, running the gamut from Fox Media to Verizon Wireless was a big one, and even DC Comics. There were some firings. And of course, earlier this week, there were these massive firings and layoffs at Activision/Blizzard. But DC has also announced, just within the last few days, cancellations of a ton of stuff. The first one makes the most sense, sadly. I mean, it's depressing that they couldn't have thought ahead to this, and it's always a shame when they back down before these dumb special interest groups of Maud Flanders types. But they canceled without even getting a release of one issue to even sort of give these people a chance to justify their outrage. Just the concept alone was enough to deluge DC with hate mail and undoubtedly threats of violence. Bottom line is the upcoming comic from Mark Russell and Richard Pace, a satire of Jesus Christ called Second Coming, where he's basically, if you ever read in I know they don't publish it anymore, but the Village Voice used to publish God Man, where God's like the superhero. It looked like a sort of more lighthearted take on that. Like, wow, what would Jesus really be like today? He'd be an awful lot like a superhero. So that's all I knew about it, was that artwork and that sort of semi-elevator pitch of Jesus is a superhero. And I was interested. I wasn't dying. I wasn't clamoring to get a look at it. But, you know, any new comic with potential to break new ground and get new kinds of fans interested in the medium, it's always a good thing. But DC fell under heavy pressure, as is not really shocking. One of the problems with comics going so very mainstream is that it means that people who have no interest in it still find out about them, take stuff like this out of context, or take it to their worst possible conclusion, and start sending threats of violence, boycotts, and all the rest. And so Vertigo, the publisher that was once, I'm going to have to do an entire separate show about the revival revival of the Vertigo line. I've mentioned in the past that when I worked at the building here in New York City that was once the home of DC Comics and Mad Magazine, at the time I was producing a radio show at Westwood One. I was very unhappy, and part of what happened was I got back into comics in large part because of the friends I made who worked at DC, and in particular, a lot of the editors at Vertigo. Now, some years back, Vertigo was just erased. I don't know if it was because of firings or redundancies, because there were some of those, or how much of it had to do with their plans for the New 52 relaunch, which was a terrible mistake and which they're doing a good job of fixing now with their Rebirth initiative, or that the idea of adult comics kind of ghettoized the regular DC line, but for whatever reason or combination of reasons, Vertigo was canceled. It has since been brought back in recent months, and I gotta be honest with you, as is always the case, I hate to agree at all with any of these crazy comic people you see making YouTube videos about, oh, it's their agenda of getting us connected to social justice, as if that's like a bad or new thing. But the new Vertigo kind of is garbage from what I've read. Every book I've read, and I'm not going to name any of them or name any of the creators, but I've read at least one issue of all the newly launched Vertigo comics, and they're bad. And this comic looked good. But it does seem that it could be the last nail in Vertigo's coffin, or Vertigo 2.0, because this really has nothing in common with Vertigo. Vertigo was really bold, really dark, really edgy, and just all about trying new stuff. This seems to be about giving comics to people that editors are friends with. I'm sorry, but it's true. It's like reading a Tumblr of an aspiring cartoonist. The plots are terrible. Dialogue is, again, I'm not naming any books, but I also don't need to. This is something I encountered universally across this new line of Vertigo books. And the art, it's as though editorial said, and for all I know, they did. I don't really know any of the goings-on at DC Comics in its present form. They moved to Los Angeles. Many of my friends have left for one reason or another. But the art really looks like it was pulled off just a random Tumblr. And the script looks awfully similar, with a lot less passion than you encounter in like a lot of fanfic. I'm not a fan of Vertigo, but I was hopeful. You know, every new comic announcement just brings out hope in me. And I was hopeful that Second Coming would be a good book, would maybe introduce some new ideas and embolden the comics industry to take on controversial topics like this. And instead, they just folded like a deck chair, which is a shame. But I can't say I truly blame them. When people that are devoted to a cause they believe is bigger than themselves, like religion, and they get together and come after you, there's no comic book worth that kind of headache, that kind of fear and intimidation. So it's just a sad state of affairs. But they've made other cancellations which are much more confusing to me. A bunch of their omnibus books that were slated to be released in 2019 were canceled, and I have no idea why. I actually am a big fan of two things in comics, two relatively recent forms of digesting comics. The first is, I know a lot of people disagree with me on this, and that's fine. I have my own reasons why I like this method of reading comics, but I mentioned earlier on this podcast that Comixology was having a sale on Umbrella Academy comics. I really like Comixology. Not only Comixology, there's another iOS app called Sequential, and of course there's the Marvel Unlimited and DC Universe apps. I really enjoy digital, I think in large part for two reasons. I believe these to be my prime motivators in embracing a version of comics that many people who are very similar to me in their tastes and aesthetics have turned away from, have rejected. For one thing, I live in New York City, as I've mentioned 1,000 times, and space is at a premium, and comics take up a lot of space. Especially if you really enjoy them. You develop this gigantic collection that not only takes up all the room that you want to live in your apartment, it can become a fire hazard. If you got cats that run wild, Iggy and Bowie, my cats, or put it this way, Iggy loves the taste and feel of Mylar in his mouth. So the more I try to protect the book, the more it gets chewed up by Iggy. So that's an issue too. But I love that, Comixology is the app I use most. So it's the example I'm giving. You can go to your My Book section and just start typing. And, in my case, I recently reread one of the very earliest books for Vertigo, or possibly one of the books that helped inspire Vertigo. It was right at that dividing line. It was either just before or just after Vertigo, Neil Gaiman's Black Orchid. Now, I have no idea where my paperback of that is. It's probably in a box in a closet, and if I tore the place apart, I could find it. But in Comixology, I just start typing in BLA, and it shows up. And I really enjoy that element of it. But I also love what is basically the exact opposite of digital comics, these omnibuses. Avengers Omnibus. Marvel was a very early entry to the party of the true omnibus, where you get this hardcover book, like 1,400 pages of comics in it, like entire years, multiple years of comics. This was after their earlier versions of trade paperbacks and hardcovers, where they were like, you know what? We think people are just crazy enough that they'll pay like $90 for 5 years of the Fantastic Four in one book. And it's a wonderful way to consume and enjoy comics. DC had already kind of done something similar to this with their absolute editions, but they also now do omnibuses omnibuses as well. They did a great one for Jack Kirby's Fourth World this time last year. I'm a big fan of those. And they had a ton slated to be released this year, and they're getting canceled right and left. These without any kind of controversy. These are not religious in any way. They don't contain the potential to be offensive to any group except people who hate comics, which, after all, is not their target audience, so who cares? So first came news on February 6th. All of the news, by the way, regarding these omnibus cancellations from DC Comics, they all come courtesy of the wonderful people, friends of mine, at Bleeding Cool. But on the 6th of February, they announced that they were canceling 2 books. The first one, an omnibus in name and format, the Batgirl of Burnside omnibus, which was written by Cameron Stewart and Brendan Fletcher, with art by Babs Tarr, Bengal, a one-word artist, not too pretentious, Eleonora Carlini, others, and Cameron Stewart. How insulting is that to Cameron Stewart, a brilliant artist? That others, just others, like Alan Smithy, are credited before him. That's a bit of a weird decision, but weirder still is the decision to cancel it. I'm going to speculate that there actually may be a reason for this, that the version of Batgirl living in Burnside that we're enjoying today comes from a different creative team, and so maybe some sort of behind-the-scenes politicking led to that group of writers and artists saying, hey, you know what? If you're going to do a Batgirl omnibus, don't do it with the team that's gone. Do it with our work. Do it in a way that's representational of the work we've been doing to the comic. That was the first thing that leapt into my mind, and I can see how it might cause DC to say, all right, you know what? Let's at least table this, put a pin in it, and just hold back on the book for a possible future release. What's much more strange is they also, on that same day, canceled Absolute Dark Knight hardcover. Now, of course, when it comes to The Dark Knight, not the movie, but the comic miniseries from 1986, done by Frank Miller, that completely reinvented Batman and did an amazing amount just for comics in general, as an art form to be respected. It rejuvenated fans who were already into comics, but it's been released and re-released and re-released so many times in the intervening decades. There isn't much more to be added. And so this, too, I can kind of see why they might have said, you know what? We've done some polling, and it looks like there's no one who's going to buy this book because no one doesn't have The Dark Knight. Anyone who's a big enough fan to shell out the kind of money we're asking for this absolute edition already has like 15 different iterations of The Dark Knight. So that, again, I kind of see. What gets confusing is the news from yesterday. This is genuinely surprising. DC has canceled, as of yesterday, February 14th, Absolute Day Tripper, which was a wonderful self-contained story that was designed, I mean, not really, but may as well have been written for an Absolute edition because the art was beautiful. And again, unlike many comic series, most comic series even, there's not going to be a need for a volume 2 or a bunch of new re-releases with bonus material. It is a self-contained story, and it would have looked great on my shelf or yours as an Absolute edition, and I don't know why they pulled it. Similarly, they pulled Absolute Swamp Thing. I couldn't begin to guess as to why. Swamp Thing has been a beloved property for years and years and years. Alan Moore basically took the already great character and reinvented him. And the Absolute Edition was going to be the Alan Moore stories, with art by Sean McManus, Dan Day, Rick Veitch, Alfredo Alcala, others, don't know who these others are, Stephen R. Bissett, and John Totalbane. And this was going to be Alan Moore's total run on Swamp Thing. Who doesn't want that? I certainly did and do. I got an email from Amazon in addition to this article saying, hey, sorry, your order for Absolute Swamp Thing's been canceled because the book's been canceled. And weirder yet, they pulled new Teen Titans Omnibus 4, which really bums me out. I've been buying these omnibuses, volumes 1 through 3, as they were released, and I was really looking forward to completing my collection. And now, as problems go, this is a very first world problem, but I don't know what any of this says about DC. The Titans are now their premier new TV title that's streaming on DC Universe, so there's certainly new interest in the characters, not to mention the past several decades, the property's been really, really boosted by the Cartoon Network shows like Teen Titans and Teen Titans Go and the movie Teen Titans Go to the Movies, and these are great books. This is Marv Wolfman and George Perez at the peak of their game, with characters that are no longer a mystery to anyone. They're no longer any kind of minutia or obscurity or trivia. They're big names in DC, and I don't know why I don't get to get Omnibus number 4. That's right, I'm making this all about me. I don't know why DC felt that it was not going to be viable for them, financially or otherwise, to publish these books, and I'd be very interested in finding out why. Anytime there's a big decision like this, it always, at least on some level, has to do with money. So I can't help but wonder, has there been a major decline in sales? If so, has it been from these omnibuses and absolute editions? Because I know that comics in general, despite being so mainstream in pop culture, sell in very low numbers compared to what they sold even in the 90s and early 2000s. There's been a drop-off of several 100% of even the biggest named titles. But despite all that, these absolute editions and omnibuses were scheduled to be released, and now they're not. And I'd be very interested in finding out why. So if you got the answer, investor, be you an insider at DC, someone who's just very good at reading these tea leaves, maybe you've got a friend at DC, whatever. I'd love to hear from you. And in fact, I'd love to hear from you for any reason. You can ask me questions, don't send me doctor suggestions. I am covered in that regard, but ask me questions or suggest topics for the show, whatever you like. Email matt@mattsager.com or call me 646-535-4788. You can also get me on social media. On Twitter, I'm at Matt Sager. My Facebook personal page is The Matt Sager. My voiceover page is Matt Sager VO. And this podcast page is Matt Sager Podcast. I'm also on Instagram as Real Matt Sager. And for all the rest, my voiceover reels, contact information, articles, blog posts, and back episodes, archives of this very podcast you're listening to right now. You can find all that at mattsagervoiceover.com. And do check out the links in the description for tonight's podcast episode. You can find links to my Patreon, patreon.com/Matt Sager, and also my merch store. My friends at WeHaveMerch.com have set me up with some really cool stuff you can get with Matt Sager podcast logos on t-shirts, hoodies, coffee cups, and stickers. Have a great weekend. I'll talk to you Monday.